nothing happened. There was no argument that changed things, no moment you could point to, no decision that was made, no morning you woke up and things were different. But something changed anyway, slowly. In the way things change when nobody's watching closely enough to catch them, when the shift is so gradual that by the time either person notices, it's already been true for a long time. The relationship is still there, still functional, still in many ways good, but it is less than it was. Less warm, less curious, less alive in the specific way it used to be. And neither person can quite say when that started, or why, or whether it was a choice, or something that simply happened while both of them were busy with everything else. Most relationships that lose their depth don't lose it through crisis. They lose it through the slow accumulation of things that stopped happening. Not conflict, not betrayal, just the gradual disappearance of what used to be there. Today I want to show you 7 ways that happens. 7 ways good relationships quietly fade. Not because anything went wrong, because nothing was done to keep it right. My name is Daniel Mercer, and one of the things I've observed consistently in how relationships quietly diminish is that the most significant losses are almost never the dramatic ones. Nobody stopped loving each other. They just stopped doing some of the things love used to look like. What's harder to see is the loss that has no event attached to it. The warmth that didn't disappear in a moment, but simply became less present. The closeness that wasn't broken, but wasn't maintained, until one day it was simply less than it had been. These losses accumulated in the space between two people who were both present, both trying, both caring, but neither of whom noticed, quite in time, what was quietly leaving. Here are 7 ways it happens. Number 1. You stopped being curious about what the other person was thinking. Early in a relationship, the other person's inner life is interesting. Not because they say interesting things necessarily, but because the access itself is new. The way they think, what catches their attention, what they've changed their mind about since the last time you really asked. Over time, the sense of knowing someone can quietly replace the practice of continuing to know them. The question, "What are you thinking?" stops being asked, not because the answer stopped mattering, but because a version of the answer already exists, because you've heard enough of how this person thinks to believe you can fill in the rest. But people change. Their thinking changes. What concerns them changes. What they find funny or interesting or disturbing changes in ways that can only be tracked if someone keeps asking. And when the asking stops, when the assumption of already knowing replaces the practice of finding out, the relationship begins operating on an older version of each person than currently exists. Not through any act of neglect, through the very human tendency to mistake familiarity for knowledge. To believe that having known someone well once means continuing to know them, without the continued inquiry that knowing actually requires. Number 2. You stopped doing things together that served no practical purpose. Early in a relationship, people do things together that make no practical sense. They go somewhere for no reason. They stay up later than they should. They do something one of them doesn't particularly enjoy because the other one does, and that, for a while, is reason enough. These things don't feel significant in the moment. They feel like small choices: where to spend a Sunday, how to pass an evening, what to do with an afternoon that has nothing in it yet. But they are doing something that their practical counterparts can't do. They're choosing each other in moments when the choice wasn't required. Over time, the impractical things gradually give way to the practical ones. The things that need to happen replace the things that didn't need to but did, and the relationship becomes more efficient, more functional, less spontaneous. And neither person decides this. It happens the way most erosion happens, through the incremental replacement of one thing with another, so slowly that at no point does it feel like a loss. Only in aggregate, looking back, does it become visible. The last time they did something together purely because they wanted to was longer ago than either of them realized. Number 3. You stopped noticing each other. Not in the obvious sense. You still see each other. You know when the other person is there and when they're not. You register their presence without thinking about it. But there's a different kind of noticing, the deliberate kind. The kind that says, I see you specifically. I see that you're tired in a particular way today. I see that something you just said was more careful than usual. I see that you chose this thing at this moment for what feels like a reason. That kind of noticing requires attention that isn't automatic. It requires a small, active turn toward the other person, a decision, even briefly, to look at them rather than past them. And over time, that decision becomes less frequent. Not because the other person became less worth noticing, because noticing takes something that the accumulated demands of shared life gradually redirect elsewhere. And the person who used to feel seen, who used to have the experience of being specifically registered by another person, begins to feel like a presence rather than a person in the relationship. Still there, still accounted for, but less individually visible than they once were. That shift is almost impossible to point to. It has no moment, it has no cause. It is simply the slow transition from being noticed to being assumed, which from the outside can look identical, but from the inside feels entirely different. Number 4. You stopped laughing about the same things. Shared laughter is not a small thing. It's one of the more reliable signals that two people are still occupying the same world, still finding the same things absurd, still surprised by the same incongruities, still sharing the specific angle of vision that makes something funny to both of them and not to everyone else. Because shared laughter requires a shared context, things seen together, noticed together, processed together into the specific private language that only these two people speak. When the shared experience is thin, the context erodes with them. The jokes that still land are the old ones. The new references are solo. When this starts to disappear, when one person laughs and the other doesn't quite, when references that used to land now have to be explained, it isn't necessarily a sign that the people have grown apart, but it is a signal worth paying attention to. It isn't a crisis. It barely registers as a change. It's just that the last time they both laughed at exactly the same thing, at exactly the same moment was, actually, neither of them can quite remember when that was. Number 5. You stopped choosing each other in moments when you didn't have to. There are moments in every relationship where choosing the other person is required. The logistics of shared life create them: decisions to be made together, time that has to be spent together, commitments that exist regardless of how either person feels that day. And then there are moments where the choice is optional, where one person could reach toward the other or not, could include them or not, could share the thing or keep it, could turn toward the relationship or turn somewhere else, and either would be legitimate. In the early period of a relationship, the optional moments are almost always used, not because they have to be, because the pull toward the other person is strong enough that the option isn't really experienced as an option. It's just what happens. Over time, the optional moments start producing different outcomes. The reach happens less reflexively. The inclusion becomes less automatic. The turn toward the other person competes with more things and wins less often. And the relationship, measured not by the required moments but by the optional ones, starts to register as a choice being made less frequently. Not through withdrawal, through the gradual reduction of something that used to be effortless. And what was once automatic starts to require something neither person quite knows how to name or ask for. Number 6. You stopped telling each other about small victories. When something good happens, something small, something that wouldn't make news, something that matters mainly because it mattered to you, there is a person you tell first, or used to be. The small victories are different from the large ones. The large ones have to be shared. They're visible. They affect both people. They require acknowledgement. The small ones don't. They only get shared if one person decides to, in the moment, reach toward the other and say, "This happened, and I wanted you to know." That reaching is one of the quieter forms of intimacy. It says, "I thought of you when something good happened. I wanted to include you in it." Not because you needed to know, but because sharing it with you is part of what made it good. When this stops, when the small victories start being absorbed privately, When the person who would have been told first is no longer the first thought, the relationship loses something that's difficult to quantify. Not information, the habit of being the person someone reaches toward when something worth sharing happens. And that habit, once lost, is surprisingly hard to restart, because reinstating it requires one person to offer something vulnerable, a small thing, offered without necessity, and to do so in a relationship where that offering has been absent long enough that it now requires intention it once didn't. Number 7. You stopped making each other a priority in small ways. Not the large ways. Those tend to be visible, named, negotiated. The large ways have advocates. Each person's needs at the major moments are usually articulated, either because the moment demands it or because the cost of not articulating them is too high. The small ways are different. The small ways are the cup of something made without being asked, the errand run because the other person mentioned it in passing, the plan slightly adjusted because the other person would prefer it, the small sacrifice that doesn't require acknowledgement because it was done willingly, invisibly, as a matter of course. These small prioritizations create something that their individual presence doesn't register, but their collective absence does. They are the texture of being cared for in an ordinary way, the daily accumulation of small evidence that the other person is thinking of you, that your preferences register, that you are present in someone's awareness, even when you're not in the room. That sense is what long relationships are largely made of. Not the major moments, the minor ones. And when the minor ones thin, when the small prioritizations become less reflexive, less frequent, less a matter of course, the relationship becomes something that works without quite being what it was. Here's what all 7 of these have in common. Most of them don't begin as conscious decisions. They happen through the gradual redirection of attention and energy that shared life requires, through the accumulation of other demands, other urgencies, other things that compete for the same finite resource that connection also needs. And none of them, individually, feels significant. The day you didn't do something impractical together doesn't feel like a loss. The moment you didn't quite notice the other person doesn't register as a change. The small victory you absorbed privately rather than sharing doesn't feel like a withdrawal, but they accumulate. And what they accumulate into is a relationship that is present, functional, caring, and smaller than it used to be. Smaller in the specific way that things become smaller when they're no longer being actively tended. Not destroyed, not broken, just gradually less. And the difficulty with this kind of diminishment is that it has no villain. Both people were trying, in the ways they knew how, with the capacity they had. The loss is real, but there is no clear moment where it could have been stopped, and no clear person who should have stopped it. What was missing wasn't more love, it was more attention, turned toward the relationship itself, not just its maintenance, that both people let lapse in the same direction, at the same pace, without either one noticing until the distance had become familiar enough to feel like the baseline. Here's what I want to say before the end. If this describes something you recognize, a relationship that is good, that functions, that you care about, but that is less than it was in ways you find difficult to name, I want to offer something that isn't a solution. These things don't diminish because people stop caring. They diminish because caring isn't the same as tending. Because love, however real, doesn't automatically translate into the specific acts of attention that keep a relationship alive in the way it was. The impractical things, the curiosity, the noticing, the laughter at the same moment, the optional choices, the small victories shared, the minor prioritizations. These require something beyond caring. They require the continued, active turning toward another person that relationships need not just at the beginning, but throughout. Most people, if they recognize something in this video, don't need to be told to care more. They already care. What they might benefit from is recognizing, specifically, what stopped. Which of these 7 things became less frequent, and what it would take to make it less infrequent again. Not a project, not a system. Just the small, specific act of beginning. If any of this described a relationship you don't want to lose, not dramatically, but quietly, by continuing to let it become less, I want to offer one observation. The things on this list are not complicated to restart. They require less than people usually think. They don't require a conversation about the state of the relationship. They don't require acknowledgement that something has been lost. They don't require either person to admit to anything. They only require one person to decide, quietly, without announcement, to do one of them. Today. This week. To suggest something impractical. To ask a question you don't already know the answer to. To notice something specific about the person across from you. To share a small victory before you've processed it alone. To do a small thing for them that wasn't required. Relationships don't usually recover from diminishment through grand gestures. They recover through the accumulation of small ones, the same way they diminished. Gradually, without drama, through the consistent return of things that had drifted away. The hardest part is that almost everything on this list can begin again with one person. The relationship doesn't need to become something new. It needs to become, again, what it already was, before either person quite noticed it had stopped being that.